Alright, let's get one thing straight. This isn't some obscure list of hidden gems or niche indie titles you've never heard of. Nope, this is a rundown of games that are actually worth sinking your time into. The kind of titles that, if you've somehow missed them, might make you question if you've been living under a rock these past few years. But trust me, these are the games that deserve a spot on your list. Let's get started. Baldur's Gate 3 has been making waves since its release, and it's not hard to see why. Built on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules, it gives players an insane amount of freedom. You're not just picking dialogue options here, you're deciding how the entire world reacts to you. Want to talk your way out of trouble? Go ahead. Prefer to unleash chaos and fight everything in sight? That works too. The game doesn't box you in, and that's a big part of its appeal. Every choice you make feels like it carries weight, and it's up to you whether you play the hero, the villain, or something in between. On top of that, the combat isn't your standard button-mashing fare. It's turn-based, which might sound slow, but it's loaded with opportunities for creativity. For instance, you can set traps with oil and fire or knock enemies off cliffs if you position yourself just right. The detail in how battles play out keeps things fresh, even dozens of hours in. Add to that the sheer scale of the game, multiple endings, countless paths to take, and deeply customizable characters, and it's clear why it's being hailed as a standout in its genre. Even after more than a decade, Skyrim is still pulling people back in. Why? Because it's massive, but not in a way that feels overwhelming. You can lose hours just wandering around and stumbling into random caves, ruins, or dragon fights. It's one of those games where no matter how much time you've put into it, there's always something you haven't seen. Recently, someone trying to get the Platinum Trophy discovered things they didn't know existed, even after playing for hundreds of hours. That kind of depth is rare. What's also interesting is how much of an impact Skyrim has had on other games. You see its DNA in modern hits like Breath of the Wild and Valheim, those open-world exploration vibes, that's Skyrim's legacy. It's not just about the size of the world, it's the freedom it gives you to tackle things your way. Whether you're crafting potions, shouting dragons out of the sky, or just stealing cheese from villagers, it's a sandbox that keeps people coming back year after year. Cyberpunk 2077 has come a long way since its rough launch. Back in 2020, it was practically unplayable on last-gen consoles, and the backlash was massive. But instead of walking away, CD Projekt Red stuck with it, dropping update after update to fix the game. With the release of the Phantom Liberty expansion in 2023, the game underwent significant changes. Systems were overhauled, and the gameplay evolved into something much closer to what players had originally hoped for. What really stands out now is how much the updates and expansion added to the experience. Phantom Liberty brought a new storyline, tweaked the gameplay, and even addressed some of the biggest complaints about how the game originally handled. Players noticed. In the first week alone, the expansion sold over 3 million copies, and Cyberpunk 2077 has now crossed 25 million sales overall. It's one of those rare games that turn things around so dramatically, it's almost like a different title compared to launch. Red Dead Redemption 2 has stuck around as a fan favorite for a reason. It's not just about riding horses and shooting bad guys, it's the sheer scale of what you can do in the world. From hunting legendary animals to casually robbing trains or even just fishing, the game gives you plenty of ways to get lost in its world. Players still talk about the smaller details, like how your beard grows over time or how NPCs remember your actions. It's that kind of stuff that makes it feel like the world's alive and not just built around you. What's impressive is how much of an impact it's had since 2018. Even with newer games coming out, people keep going back to this one. It's still topping best games of all time lists and influencing how open-world games are made. That said, some recent news got fans buzzing. PlayStation is pulling it from their PS Plus service, which feels like a weird move given how much it still means to players. Whether you're jumping back in or picking it up for the first time, it's the kind of game that sticks with you. Days Gone is one of those games that splits opinions. On one hand, it's got this relentless energy when you're up against a freaker horde. Imagine dozens, sometimes hundreds, of them barreling toward you while you scramble to set traps or reload just in time. That's when the game shines. It's chaotic in the best way. But then there's the rest of the world, which can feel a little too familiar if you've played other open-world games. You've got your camps, your side quests, and the occasional go here and fetch this moments that don't always keep the adrenaline going. Still, players seem to connect with it more than critics did. Look at the user scores on Metacritic. Fans rate it way higher than the reviews from launch. It's the kind of game that, if you're into the vibe, can really hook you. You've got a lone biker, a post-apocalyptic world, and plenty of opportunities to test your survival skills. Sure, it's not perfect, but it's a solid choice if you're looking for something with a bit of grit and a whole lot of freakers to mow down. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is still the go-to RPG for a lot of players, and it's easy to see why. The game throws you into a massive world where your decisions actually matter. It's not just about slashing monsters or chasing loot, you're constantly making tough calls that shape the story around you. Whether it's helping villagers with their problems or negotiating with shady characters, you feel like everything you do has some weight. That's what keeps players coming back even years after release. What's kept it relevant, though, is the next-gen update from 2022. CD Projekt Red gave the game a visual overhaul with ray tracing and smoother performance, which makes it feel fresh even on modern systems. For both new players and veterans, it's a chance to experience the game in a new way. Add in the consistent praise it gets for its storytelling and the variety of quests, and you've got a game that still holds its ground, even against newer RPGs. Detroit Become Human is one of those games that lives or dies by how much you care about storytelling. The whole experience revolves around branching choices, and every decision you make sends ripples through the narrative. It's not just about quick-time events, it's about shaping how characters see you and whether they survive to the end. For some, the moral dilemmas and multiple endings are exactly what make it worth playing. It's like piecing together a huge, interactive puzzle. Critics and players don't always agree on this one, though. Some reviewers weren't sold on how the game handles heavy themes, calling it too blunt at times. But if you look at user scores, a lot of players seem to love the freedom to steer the story however they want. On Metacritic, it's sitting at an impressive 8.7 from players, which says a lot about its lasting appeal. Whether it's your first playthrough or you're diving back in to see how different choices pan out, it's a game that sticks with you. Ghost of Tsushima stands out for how it handles combat and exploration. The fights aren't just about swinging your sword around, they're about precision and timing. You've got to watch your enemies closely, figure out their patterns, and strike at the right moment. It keeps you on your toes, especially when you're up against multiple opponents. And then there's the exploration, where the game does something different by using the wind as your guide. No big, flashy markers cluttering your screen, just a subtle push in the right direction. It's a clever way to make you feel more connected to the world. What keeps players talking, though, is the attention to detail in how the world feels alive. From fields of swaying grass to villages under siege, the game's setting pulls you in. The Iki Island expansion in the director's cut added even more depth, with new areas to explore and challenges to take on. Critics sometimes point out that the side quests can get a bit repetitive, but for most players, the overall experience more than makes up for it. With its recent PC release in 2024, it's reaching an even wider audience, showing that this game still has plenty of life left in it. Kingdom Come is all about diving into a brutally realistic medieval world. Forget flashy magic or overpowered heroes, this game keeps things grounded. The combat system is one of the standout features, and it's no button-mashing affair. You've got to learn how to block, strike, and manage your stamina like a real swordsman. It's tough at first, but once you get the hang of it, every fight feels like a personal challenge. And then there's the historical accuracy, from the architecture to the clothing, which really sets the tone for the whole experience. What keeps people talking about it, though, is the depth of its RPG mechanics. It doesn't hold your hand, and choices you make can lead to very different outcomes, even in side quests. Sure, some critics found it rough around the edges, with bugs and a steep learning curve, but fans appreciate how ambitious it is. With news of a sequel coming in 2025, there's a lot of excitement about how they'll expand on what made the first game so memorable. It's the kind of game where patience and strategy pay off big time. Dying Light made its mark by blending fast-paced parkour with brutal melee combat in a city crawling with zombies. Running across rooftops while avoiding hordes or ambushing a lone infected with a makeshift weapon, it keeps you on edge. The day-night cycle adds another layer. When the sun sets, the weaker zombies give way to terrifying volatiles that force you to rethink every move. It's not just about surviving, it's about figuring out how to use the environment to your advantage. What's kept players engaged, even years later, are the memorable side quests and the freedom to explore. Sure, the main story might not stand out, but the city itself feels like the real star. Recently, the game's influence continues with the announcement of Dying Light the Beast, a standalone adventure expanding on the mechanics fans love. With the addition of new environments and co-op options, the developers continue to build on the gameplay elements that made the original so engaging. So, there you have it. Games that aren't just about the hype, but genuinely deserve your time. Maybe you've played some of these already, or maybe you're just now adding them to your list. Either way, each one brings something unique to the table. Missed a few? Consider this your sign to give them a shot. You might just discover your next all-time favorite.